Baxter, call your first witness.
You're in the state to call Officer Justin Smith, the Dalton Police Department. Officer, if you would remain standing, prepared to receive an oath. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may be seated. Would you please introduce yourself to the jury and then spell your first and last name for the court reporter?
Justin Smith, Justin
Officer, you're wearing a patrol uniform, so would you tell us how you're employed, sir?
with the Dalton Police Department.
And how long have you been employed with the Dalton Police Department?
About a year and 5 months.
And were you employed by the Dalton Police Department in September of 2017?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you on patrol at that time?
Yes,
Or were
ma'am.
you in training?
I was in training on patrol.
Can you describe sort of the fundamentals of how a person becomes a police officer, what training is required for that?
You take a 408-hour basic training class down in Forsyth. It's GIPSTIC, it's what's called Georgia Public Safety Training Center, and they train you on all the fundamentals of becoming a police officer.
And at the end of that course, are you what we call post-certified?
Yes, ma'am.
Does that allow you to arrest people here in the state of Georgia?
Yes, ma'am.
When you leave the post academy, do they sort of just turn you loose on the streets?
No, ma'am.
Okay, can you describe what that initial process is like for the jury?
It's different with different agencies, but the Dalton Police Department, when you come back from training, you have it's called a mini academy. It's actually all classroom stuff to learn about the department and how things work. And then after that, there's 4 phases that are each 4 weeks long, A, B, C, and D. There's a midterm in the middle and a final that's each 2 weeks long.
So during September of 2017, were you in that training process?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you know what phase you were at that time?
I was in the C phase.
Were you assigned to a training officer or a supervising officer?
Yes, ma'am, training officer.
And who was that?
Officer John Edwards.
Is that Detective Edwards that's here in court today?
Yes, ma'am.
On September the 23rd of 2017, was Officer Edwards your training officer?
Yes, ma'am.
And were you on patrol that day?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you have an occasion to make a traffic stop on a vehicle that was driven by the defendant, in this case, Mr. Stephen Foster?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you recall the reason for that stop?
Driving down Walnut Avenue without his headlights on.
Do you recall the approximate time that that traffic stop occurred?
About 2:20 in the morning.
So I assume that night you were working third shift.
Yes, ma'am.
What's third shift at the Dalton Police Department?
It is 10:30 p.m. to 7:30 a.m.
And you said you traffic stopped Mr. Foster on Walnut Avenue?
Yes,
Is that
ma'am.
correct? Is that here in Whitfield County?
Yes, ma'am.
Did Mr. Foster stop his vehicle on Walnut Avenue?
No, ma'am.
Can you describe what happened?
Yes, ma'am. When I initiated the traffic stop, we turned actually off of Walnut Avenue onto Morton Drive, which is over near the S-curves of Walnut Avenue, if you're familiar.
Can you sort of, ladies and gentlemen of the jury live here in Whitfield County, but can you kind of put us somewhere on Walnut Avenue where this would have occurred? Give us some sort of landmarks maybe?
It's going to be just east of the Steak and Shake on Walnut Avenue.
So coming towards town.
Yes, ma'am.
How does that traffic stop begin? I'm sorry, when you blue light someone.
Yes, ma'am.
And they pull their vehicle over, what's the first thing that happens?
I just make contact with the driver, advise him why I stopped him, identify myself and what department I'm with, and then ask him if there's any legal reason for the traffic violation.
And is that what happened in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recall any of the conversation that took place between you and Mr. Foster at that time?
Initially, it was just general, that information, and then asking for his driver's license, and just general conversation.
Just a regular plain traffic stop?
Yes, ma'am.
Did there come a time when you began to believe that Mr. Foster might be under the influence of something?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you sort of describe to the jury why that is?
Whenever I was speaking to him, he made a statement that he had not been drunk since 1981, and also stated I could give him a breath test if I wanted to, and I asked him why I would need to give him a breath test, and he said because he had 2 or 3 beers about 3 hours ago.
At that point, officer, did you ask Mr. Foster to complete field sobriety testing?
Yes, ma'am.
And what, if anything, did Mr. Foster ask you at that time?
During the testing, he asked for a breathalyzer test.
Okay, And can you explain to the jury what a breathalyzer is? First of all, do you carry a breathalyzer?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Is it also known as the alka sensor?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. But it's the same basic idea, correct?
Yes,
It's
ma'am.
what we've seen, people blowing into a machine on the side of the street. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Did Mr. Foster blow into your alka sensor?
Yes, ma'am.
How many times did he do that?
Twice.
And were both of those attempts successful?
The first attempt was not.
Okay. So he did make one successful blow into the alka sensor.
Yes, ma'am.
At that time, did you place Mr. Foster under arrest?
Yes, ma'am.
For what?
Driving under the influence.
And what, if anything, did Mr. Foster ask you at that time?
He did ask for a blood test.
Okay. Did he ask to be taken anywhere in particular for a blood test?
Hamilton Medical Center.
Now, officer, at that point, would you have been required to take Mr. Foster for a blood test?
No, ma'am. Once he asked, yes.
Prior to him saying?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So you accommodated Mr. Foster's request for a blood test?
Yes, ma'am.
When Mr. Foster was placed under arrest, did you read him his Miranda warnings?
I did.
Do you do those from memory? I know on TV shows with cops, they always just start talking. Is that how you guys do it in real life?
No, ma'am. I read it off of a card.
Okay. Do you have that card on your person today?
I do.
Can you pull that out for
Yeah.
us?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that the card that you were carrying the day, September 23rd of 2017?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And you did read Mr. Foster his Miranda warnings from that card?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you just read those for the jury? We've all heard them 1,000 times, but can you read them for the jury?
I will. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. You have the right to talk to a lawyer and have him present while you're being questioned. If you cannot afford to hire a lawyer, one will be appointed to represent you before any questioning if you wish. You can decide at any time to exercise these rights and not answer any questions or make any statements.
And you read that card to Mr. Foster completely, correct?
Yes,
Same way
ma'am.
you just read it to me.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that the only information you read Mr. Foster at that time?
No, ma'am.
What else?
I also read the Georgia implied consent card.
Is that something you do from memory?
No, ma'am. I have another card.
Okay. Is that the same card again that you were carrying on September the 23rd of 2017?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You haven't had a replacement card. That's actually the card you had.
That is the same card.
Okay. And you read the Georgia implied consent to Mr. Foster?
I did.
Okay. Can you read for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what your implied consent card says?
I will. Georgia law requires you to submit to a state-administered chemical test of your blood, breath, urine, or other bodily substances for the purposes of determining if you're under the influence of alcohol or drugs. If you refuse this testing, your Georgia driver's license or privilege to drive on the highways of the state will be suspended for a minimum period of 1 year. Your refusal to submit to the required testing may be offered into evidence against you at trial. If you submit to the testing and the results indicate an alcohol concentration of 0.08 grams or more, your Georgia driver's license or privilege to drive on the highways of the state may be suspended for a minimum period of 1 year. After submitting to the required state test, you are entitled to an additional chemical test of your blood, breath, urine, or other bodily substances at your own expense from qualified personnel of your own choosing. And then we follow up with the question, would you submit to the state-administered chemical test of your, which in this case I read him for actually breath, under the implied consent law?
And what, if anything, did Mr. Foster say in response to your reading implied consent to him?
Something that he didn't want to take a breath test, he wanted a blood test.
For the record, I'm marking State's Exhibit number 1, the Miranda warning card Officer Smith read into the record. And as item 2, the Georgia implied consent notice for suspects age 21 or over as item number 2.
Objection, States 1 and 2.
No, Your Honor.
States 1 and 2 are admitted.
Officer Smith, we may have covered this, but after Mr. Foster asked for a blood test, did you transport him to Hamilton Medical Center?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you make any stops along the way?
No, ma'am.
And when you take someone for a DUI blood test, does the hospital provide the kit for that?
No, ma'am.
Where does the blood actually go?
to the GBI crime lab.
I mean, in what sort of container?
It's in a cardboard box that has some foam in it, and there's 2 vials in there. Once they draw the blood, they go back into that box, and it's secured with tape that's sealed and signatured, so it can be, you can tell if it's been tampered with.
Let's go back. Where does that box come from? I mean, where do you go to?
We have
that?
them at the police department,
Okay. Do you know who provides those to the Dalton Police Department?
the GBI.
Okay. So this is not a kit that Dalton Police Department has created on their own?
No, ma'am.
This is certainly not something you created on your own?
No, ma'am.
Did you accompany Mr. Foster to Hamilton Medical Center?
I did.
Who drew his blood?
A phlebotomist at Hamilton Medical Center.
Is that phlebotomist an employee of the Dalton Police Department?
No, ma'am.
Is that phlebotomist an employee of this state, to your knowledge?
No, ma'am.
Did you observe Mr. Foster's blood being drawn? Were you physically present in the room?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you complete the officer's portion of that crime lab kit?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you witness the phlebotomist draw the blood from Mr. Foster and mark those tubes?
Yes, ma'am.
At any time when that process was happening, were you not present in the room?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so you were there for the whole kit and caboodle?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What happened to those vials once the phlebotomist was done with them?
She put them back in the box and sealed them up and signed the label.
And did she then give that box to you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and what did you do with that box?
We actually take it to the police department and secure it in an evidence locker for our property and evidence section of the police department.
Okay, when you say, that's a term maybe you and I are familiar with, but maybe the jury's not familiar with. When you say property and evidence, can you kind of explain just a little bit about how that works?
We have a room in the police department where any evidence off of any case is secured. And there's 2 evidence employees that work in there. They handle all the evidence in and out.
So once you've submitted your evidence into the property and evidence at Dalton Police Department, as far as that evidence is concerned, you're finished. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You're not the person who transports that blood down to the GBI crime lab?
No, ma'am.
Okay. That's someone else in the Dalton Police Department's job?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Officer Smith, did you ever at any point during this process do anything to tamper with or affect or change Mr. Foster's blood alcohol test kit in any way?
No, ma'am.
That's all the questions I have for you, but I'm sure Mr. Murray may have some.
Okay.
All right, question for the witness.
I do, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
It would be fair to say, wouldn't it, that the purpose of your incident report is so you can put every clue of intoxication, every shred of evidence that you consider to be important, you record it in your incident report, correct?
Yes, sir.
That's why it's there. That's where the important stuff, the meaningful stuff goes, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, you've talked about the clues of why you thought he might be under the influence. Now, the handheld test that you're talking about, that just shows, for your purposes, the presence of some that it was positive for some presence of alcohol, correct?
Yes, sir.
And, but he had already admitted to you that he had had 2 drinks that night, didn't he?
2 or 3. Yes, sir.
So, you knew the presence of alcohol was somewhere in there.
Yes, sir.
Okay, already, that is my point. Let's talk about the absence of clue. Nowhere in your incident report do you ever mention the smell of alcohol, correct?
No, sir.
And that is normally, you would agree, I know back then you may not have had a lot of experience because you were doing training, but you've obviously continued to work since then.
Yes, sir.
And handled a few DUI cases?
Yes, sir.
And you would acknowledge me that the most common clue that gets DUI investigations going once you make a stop is the smell of alcohol, correct?
It has something to do with it, yes.
It shows that the more someone drinks, the more they smell of alcohol.
Yes, sir.
Correct? Yet in this case, no smell of alcohol was present. Correct?
I do not remember.
Okay. Well, you acknowledge it's nowhere in your report.
No, sir, it's not the report.
All right. Let's get to the manner of driving. Nowhere in your report do you ever mention that he was driving erratically.
No,
correct?
sir.
And you didn't cite him for any traffic offense other than having his lights off.
That's correct.
Okay. And you didn't, and we do see some video, when we play the video later, we do see some, have you looked at the video?
Yes, sir.
And we do see some video of him driving for a few blocks, fair to say?
It was a very short distance. It wasn't
Well,
any blocks.
2 turns,
Yes, sir.
okay? And you, nowhere did you note, or is it apparent from the video that there's any drifting or crossing of lanes, correct?
No, sir.
Or failure to maintain lane,
No, sir.
correct? No failure to use turn signal,
No, sir.
correct? He had 2 turns and he used the turn signal both times,
Yes, sir.
correct? And if he hadn't, that would have been another offense you could have charged him with, obviously.
Yes, sir.
Any of that above. Obviously wasn't speeding, correct?
No, sir.
And you didn't cite him or observe him do any sort of improper turn when he made the 2 turns that we talked about.
Correct.
He didn't go in the other lane
No, sir.
or up on the curb or anything like that.
No, sir.
The only clues you noted was not driving with the lights on at basically 2 o'clock in the morning
Yes, sir.
off Walnut. You agree Walnut's pretty well lit compared to other areas.
In some areas, yes, sir.
And you would agree with me, would you not? Your report also, you never make any mention at any point that he was ever slurring his speech. Fair to say?
Fair. Yes, sir.
Okay. And he was, in fact, talking pretty much continually, right?
Yes, sir.
And you acknowledge that y'all were getting some entertainment value from it. I know you're doing your job and y'all were polite. I'm not jumping on you, believe me. But I am saying y'all were laughing throughout that video at what he was saying.
There were parts.
Okay. And I'm not sure if it's you who's talking or Officer Edwards, but one of you said something to the effect of, well, I could listen to him all night long.
Yes, sir.
All right, that was that. Was that you?
No, sir.
It was not?
It's not me.
Okay. And at the, even at the hospital, we continue to hear giggling, and somebody had to leave the room at some point. They were laughing so hard. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But during all of and he obviously would strike you as a prideful man. Wouldn't you agree that it came across that way to you?
Sure.
And y'all were not at any point, I mean, I know he got out of line, and I expect him to admit he got out of line with some of the things he said to y'all, but y'all at no point were worried that he was actually going to do anything physical to either one of you. Correct?
No, sir.
And he, in fact, would be a little passive-aggressive, wouldn't he? I mean, he might say something kind of
Yes, sir.
offensive, but then back off, and then say something charming and kind of go back and forth with it.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Were you made aware, I know it's on the video, if you watched the video, you were aware that the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder was brought both by him and as well as the female that was in the car, correct?
What is that commonly the
ADHD.
ADHD?
ADHD, yes.
It was.
ADHD.
Yeah, I remember it being brought up. Yes, sir.
Okay. And you would certainly agree that, I know you obviously believe that there may have been some alcoholic influence as well, but he was acting hyperactive in almost every level, wasn't he?
Yes,
I
sir.
would object to the extent that Mr. Murray is asking this officer to diagnose symptoms as being ADHD or not ADHD.
I'm not, okay, I'm not asking you about that disease. I'm just asking you in general. You do know what the word hyperactive means. Forget about any medical term, about ADHD or anything else. Was he acting hyperactively based on your observations?
Sure. Yes, sir.
Okay. And you would agree that field sobriety tests, when they train you on those, they teach you that basically they're divided attention tests, correct?
Yes, sir.
They want you to multitask and focus on different things at one time.
Yes, sir.
All right. And you understand, do they ever give you any training on how you deal with someone that might have attention deficit disorder? I'm not asking you to make any comment about the diagnosis. I'm just asking you to comment, do they ever tell you to treat a suspect differently who may have that particular condition or who claims to have that particular condition?
No, sir.
Now, you state, the first thing that I remember reading from you is that he was swaying during the HGN test.
Your Honor, objection. Can we approach?
Okay. I'm not asking you about anything on the HGN results. Okay. What I'm asking you is, your memory is that he was swaying during the HGN test.
Objection, Your Honor. It's testimony that has not been, the officer didn't testify to that. He hasn't said that. That's assuming things that haven't been testified to.
Well, all right, during the HGN test, during the HGN test, was he standing straight or was he swaying?
Your Honor, objection, I believe the court just ruled on this at the bench.
I did, yes.
So if I understand the court's ruling, I'm not allowed to ask what his physical...
You read the court's ruling, right?
You've watched the videotape, have you not?
Yes, sir.
Based on you watching the videotape, do you have anything, any of your testimony, your memory of it, that has changed since watching the videotape?
No, sir.
Have you ever performed any other field sobriety tests on older clients using, other than the three? We know the three basic ones. I'm not asking about those. I'm just saying, are those always the same three you perform?
Judge, objection, Mr. Rollins.
Not asking.
That was relevant.
Your Honor, they're going to show the video with all these tests being done. I think it will help the jury to understand what's coming, what's visually coming.
Your Honor, if the state did in fact play that evidence, Mr. Murray would be entitled to cross-examine the person who places that into evidence as to the substance of it. But there is no video evidence. The court has already ruled, and now we're just trying to backdoor what the court wouldn't let in the front door.
I stand objection.
I reserve the right, then, Your Honor, to recall this witness after the video is
You
played.
may do so.
Your microphone was not turned on during this stop, is that correct?
At the beginning part, no, sir.
Okay, well, yours never became turned on, did it?
There's only one.
All right, but y'all didn't have the video, so we don't hear the first 10 minutes of what's being said. You testified that you talked and you said certain things.
Yes,
to
sir.
me. So we don't have that. That's nowhere on the tape. It's silent. All we see is you talking together.
Yes, sir.
And I wanted to make sure I understood why you're on training. Why was the audio tape not on?
The car we were using is one of the older cars. When you're in training, you usually take a pool car out, is what we call them. And it's the old retired cars. And the video systems in those weren't the greatest. And we were actually not even sure that the audio worked in that car. So in hopes that it did work, we went ahead and once we figured it out and started talking to him some more, Officer Edwards, I think, actually went back to the car and turned it on in hopes that it would work, and it actually did end up working.
All right, but again, that was 10 minutes after y'all had already been talking to him.
I'm not sure how long. It was a little bit after I'd stopped him, yes, sir.
Okay. Now, just to confirm, we are dealing with a man in his 60s, right? You were able to determine his age.
Yes, sir.
And as you said earlier, you were aware that he claimed to have ADHD.
He had mentioned it.
And he, in fact, at some point showed you the wound on his head, correct? You remember him bending over and showing you the wound where he got headbutted?
I didn't see a wound, but he did bend over and try to show me something on his head.
Okay. Now, in your mind, the blood test to be done, well, before he said anything, your intent was to do a breath test, is that correct?
Yes,
Has
sir.
gone on without him making a specific request.
Yes, sir. I read him for breath under the implied consent.
But you agree that he asked to go to Hamilton because he trusted Hamilton and wanted them to do the test, correct?
Blood test, yes, sir.
All right. And that you accommodated, the word I believe you used in the motion hearing the other day was that you accommodated that request.
Yes, sir.
All right. And that he was taken to Hamilton to do the test, And this was right after you read the implied consent that you testified to.
Yes, sir.
And then immediately he says, I want to go to Hamilton to take the test. And then you accommodate him by doing so.
Yes, sir.
Okay? And when you get to Hamilton, however, you, in fact, only let Hamilton to do the blood draw. Correct? They don't actually do the testing of the blood there, do they?
No, sir. The GBI crime lab does the testing.
I understand. But the accommodation that you testified to and that you said earlier was that Hamilton was going to do the test. That's what he was asking for Hamilton to do the test because he trusted them. And that how you said, yes, instead of a breath test, I will accommodate you and do that. Correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, but they didn't actually do the test. They just did the draw.
They did the draw, but she also told Mr. Foster it's going to the GBI crime lab, and he never said anything after that.
Well, after he was informed after the blood had already been taken that it was going to be sent to the GBI crime lab.
Yes, sir, but under implied consent, I did read in that he could have an additional test if he told us who he wanted to do it and pay for it.
I'm not talking about the additional test. I'm talking about the test right after you read the implied consent, and I believe
Yes,
you
sir.
so noted that I thought he was initially asking, not for the additional test, but the first test was to be a blood test, and y'all agreed to do that at the hospital.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And he, at some point on the way to the hospital, had asked y'all, well, what happens if I pass the test when I get down there? What happens if my blood is low underneath the limit? And you remember him asking that?
I don't.
Okay. But you, since you don't remember that, you don't remember what y'all's reply was?
No, sir.
Okay. And I want to make sure you do agree with me there's a difference between a blood draw and a blood test.
Yes, sir.
And a blood draw would be just taking the blood out.
Yes, sir.
But the blood test is the actual testing of what the blood alcohol count in the blood is.
Yes, sir.
All right. So, and you would agree that nowhere on the videotape do you ever use the word blood draw. All that's used is either blood test or blood work.
Yes, sir. We always call the blood test, under implied consent, we always call it a blood test.
Okay. But that's my point. Hamilton didn't do the test.
No, sir, they did not.
Okay. All right, Your Honor, I believe that's all, but I would reserve the right to recall, so I ask that he not bring to you.
Anything further, Ms. Witness?
Just one quick question, officer. When you do a blood alcohol test, a state-administered blood alcohol test, is there any option other than sending that test to the state crime lab? Can you pick or choose who is going to test those results?
No, ma'am.
Is there an option for you to turn and drive that blood to crime lab yourself?
No, ma'am.
Do you have any other option in your department besides submitting that to Property and Evidence at Dalton Police Department?
No, ma'am.
No further questions?
Is it your testimony that, to your knowledge, Hamilton Medical Center has never sent or never sends blood testing done there at y'all's request directly to the crime lab from there?
Could you repeat? I'm not sure what you're asking.
Is it your testimony that Hamilton Medical Center has never directly sent blood vials without going through the department straight to the crime lab itself?
I don't know how they work.
Okay. Do you know, is it your testimony that the department has never asked Hamilton Medical Center to do a state-administered test?
Not that I'm familiar with. I'm not sure.
Okay. But all that you would know about is since you came on board?
Yes,
Would that
sir.
be correct?
Yes, sir.
Hold for just a second, Your Honor, if I had just a moment.
You just step down and, I'll ask for witness to remain in attendance. You don't have to discuss the testimony of the witnesses while you're outside the courtroom. Right, next, please.
Your Honor, may I have just a moment, please, open for to see if crime lab is here?
All right, certainly.
Your Honor, the state would call Adhly Huertas Rivera. If you remain standing prepared to take an oath, do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may be seated. If you would please state your name and spell it for the court reporter.
Yes, my name is Adhly Huertas Rivera, Adhly, Huertas, Huertas, Rivera.
And do I call you Ms. Huertas Rivera? Is that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Would you please sort of introduce yourself to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury and explain how you're employed, ma'am?
Yes, I'm a scientist for the crime lab, for the GBI crime lab, and we test for the presence of or absence of of alcohol or drugs in biological specimens.
Would you give us just a little bit about your background, your education, please?
Yes, I have a bachelor's in chemistry from the University of Puerto Rico. I also have a PhD in chemistry from Florida International University.
And how long have you been at we call it the GBI crime lab?
I've been there for 2 years now.
And I believe you said before that part of your job includes testing blood samples for the presence or absence of alcohol. Is that right?
That's correct.
What training have you received from the GBI in order to do that?
So in addition, my education, we get a training from the GBI where we go over the pharmacology of alcohol, which essentially is how the alcohol interacts with the body and how the body interacts with the alcohol, and also testimony in court, impairment, and all that.
How much training, roughly, would you say you received from the GBI or the Department of Forensic Science before you're allowed to begin your job?
I will say it was about roughly a year.
Okay. Did you have occasion to examine a blood sample sent to you by the Dalton Police Department on October the 18th of 2017?
I did sample.
Okay. For those of us who maybe don't work in this field every day, can you explain for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how you receive a blood sample to be tested?
So we can receive a blood sample one of three ways. One could be the lockbox system, which is essentially a locker, a two-way locker. I'm sorry.
When is
The lockbox system is a two-way locker where the representative from the police department will drop off the evidence. It will be locked, and the only way it can be accessed is through the other side by one of the evidence receiving staff. The other will be a mailing system, UPS, FedEx, USPS, and the third one will be hand-to-hand.
Okay. Do you know how you received the sample in this case?
In this case, it was hand-to-hand.
Okay. So a blood sample comes in to the GBI. I'm assuming you guys have a big lab somewhere. Is that right?
Mm-hmm,
Okay, so a sample comes in to you guys. Is there a way that you track that sample through your lab?
That's correct. Once the evidence receiving staff will get the sample, they will open it, check that there is no tampering, and they will put it in a bag, and they will assign what we call a DOFS number, which is essentially a number, an identifier for that specific evidence.
Okay. So
And
just to be clear, DOFS stands for Department of Forensic Science, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So this number, is that is it fair to say that that's your tracking number in your department?
That's correct.
Okay. I'm sorry, I think I interrupted your flow there. You get a blood sample, it receives a tracking number, okay? I believe you said something in there about them inspecting it to see if it had been tampered with, is that right?
Correct.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the evidence is received in what we call a sealed alcohol collection kit, and the evidence receiving staff will essentially check for if it is open, if it doesn't have, or it includes everything that we need to make sure that evidence is from that person and so on.
Okay. So for those of us who maybe our experience with blood draw is just like at the doctor's office, right? When you say tubes, do they look similar to what you have drawn at a doctor's office at a hospital? Are we talking about those little glass sort of tubes?
Correct.
Okay. And the first step is to make sure those haven't been tampered with.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Hypothetically speaking, what happens if it appears that that's been tampered with?
We will make a note of it.
Okay. In this case, did you make any note that it appeared that those tubes had been tampered with in any way?
There's no note.
Okay. So we have our sample. It's in your lab. It's got its tracking number, right? What happens then?
Then it will go to the toxicology department in that case because blood alcohol was requested.
Okay. So there's sort of a toxicology department. Is that fair? All right. And is that blood just sort of dropped off in your office, like in a basket or something? Can you talk about what happens there?
Yeah, that blood will go to a cooler, what we call a cooler, and it will be kept there until the scientist that the case is assigned to is ready to sample it and analyze it.
Okay, so the sample is going to be assigned to a particular scientist in your department, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And it's stored where until it's tested?
In a cold room.
In a cold room. A refrigerated room?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's from the time you receive it to the time you test it, the sample's stored refrigerated. Is that
That's
fair?
correct.
Okay. All right. Were you assigned to conduct the blood alcohol examination on the sample sent to Mr. sample sent by Dalton Police Department taken from Mr. Foster?
That's correct.
And I believe you testified before there was no evidence that had been tampered with.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Can you explain how you go about testing for the presence of alcohol in a blood sample?
Yes. We get assigned a set of 29 cases, and we will put those cases in order, in numerical order. We go through, open one by one, and we take a small sample, a small amount of blood from the tube, and we put it in another glass vial that we call a glass tube, and we keep going until we have completed all the cases. Now that we have completed all the cases, we will do the same thing, but in opposite order, the numerical order. So we're taking a sample from the tube twice. After that, we go into the instrument, and in the instrument, we are able to quantify or know the amount of alcohol in these different cases based on a set of controls. This is a quality control procedure, and this set of controls, we know what they contain, so we know what to expect from it. That's how we know if the instrument is in proper working condition or not.
Okay. So when you go to test the presence of alcohol in blood, you're not just looking at it and saying, that looks like a 0.2 to me, right? No?
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. So you said that you have controls in your lab.
That's correct.
Can you, not all of us are scientists, I was an English major, can you kind of just explain a little bit about what that means for us?
So the control is a substance that we know how much of an alcohol is there and how many different alcohols are present. So we know what we have there. And based on that, we can quantify the different case samples because we build what we call a calibration curve, which is essentially a comparison of what the case is giving to me versus what the control is giving to me.
Okay. So you have, for example, a sample that you know is a 0.1.
Correct.
And then you use that to compare to what's given to you.
Correct.
Is that sort of generally, I know I'm way oversimplifying what you do, but is that generally how it works?
That's
Okay.
correct.
All right. What type of instruments do you use for this test?
We use what we call a gas chromatography mass spectrometer.
And is that the DFS approved machine for that purpose?
That's correct.
And is that what you used in this case?
Correct.
Okay. From the time you received the sample until the time you analyzed it, did you comply with your DOFS or your GBI protocols for testing blood alcohol?
Yes.
Okay. And at the end of that, are you able to render a professional opinion about the amount of alcohol present, if any, in Mr. Foster's sample?
Yes, ma'am.
And what is that number?
Ethyl alcohol results by gas chromatography, 0.107 plus or minus 0.005 grams per 100 milliliters.
Okay, so what is that plus or minus 0.005 grams, what does that refer to? What does that mean?
That will be the variance associated with that number.
Okay, so is that sort of the margin of error, the possible error that could be there, or is that?
If we were to test this sample again, there is 99% confident that it will go from the 0.102 to plus 5 to 0.013.
Okay. Now when you receive a blood sample for testing, or I guess any kind of sample, are you told anything about the case when you receive that sample?
No.
Do you know, for example, why Mr. Foster was traffic stopped originally?
No, ma'am.
Do you know anything about his interaction with the officers?
No.
Do you know anything about Mr. Foster's medical history, his personality, any conditions he may have?
No, ma'am.
Are you looking in this blood sample for anything other than the presence or absence of alcohol?
No, ma'am.
Okay. I believe somewhere in there you said something about 99% certainty. Can you explain a little bit about what that means for the jury? Again, assuming that we're not scientists and we don't really know.
I always think about it as when I'm getting ready to bake. You don't get exactly 100 grains of flour every time you want to measure 1 cup. So that's essentially, like 99 of the time, it will be a cup, but you're not sure that it's that number specifically.
Let me ask you this. In your lab, is there any test that is more specific than the one that was performed on this? Or is this sort of I guess I'm asking, is this our gold standard of testing for blood alcohol?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. There's nothing else that you do in your office that would be better or more accurate than this?
No.
Okay, this is the test. I don't have any more questions for you. I'm sure Mr. Murray has some.
I do, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you tell this jury the date that the sample was originally taken?
I have the blood draw, you mean?
Yes.
It was taken 9/23/2017 at 3:17 a.m.
Okay. And that is the blood draw, not the blood test?
That's the blood draw.
All right. When you, to be taken to a hospital for the blood draw means, well, let me ask it to you this way. Who does the test itself? I know you've already answered, but just answer it again, please.
Okay, yes. The blood alcohol test, that's to determine the amount of alcohol that was present in the blood sample. That will be, in this case, me.
All right. The blood draw was done by the hospital. Presumably.
I don't know.
Well, okay.
It's Maria.
The blood draw and the blood test are two entirely
Correct.
different things.
That's correct.
And the terms should not be confused. Would you agree with that?
That's correct.
And I know this is elementary for you, but how would you define the word test itself?
Is the determination, identification, and quantification in this case for the presence or absence of alcohol.
Okay. And you're not stating that hospitals don't have a likewise capacity to test?
I am not saying that.
Okay. But just that you have protocols that y'all follow with the crime lab?
To determine the correct the amount of alcohol.
Okay. Have you ever been asked to retest something that came directly from the hospital, a blood test that came from the hospital?
Retested?
To retest it or to review the results?
No.
Okay.
I mean, not me.
Now, you said you kept it refrigerated. Let's explain to the jury why you keep, what happens if you don't keep it refrigerated?
They can be a slight decrease of the amount of alcohol, but because the blood is preserved or kept in a great test tube, which has preservatives and that have anti-clotting agents, we just avoiding 100% that to happen.
Okay. Now, have you heard of endogenous alcohol production?
As in the production of alcohol out of
Sure.
nowhere?
Let's say we take anything organic material and we put it in a tube without oxygen, anaerobic? Is that the proper term for it?
Mm-hmm.
All right. In that event, fermentation can occur and will occur eventually.
Correct, that's a possibility. Not when it's kept in a test tube that has preservatives and anticoagulants.
Okay. And your claim is that when did you put that in the test tube?
I didn't.
Okay. You didn't. So you can't testify that this test tube had that in it then.
Well, we have pictures of the evidence. We take pictures as we receive the evidence of the test tubes.
Well, who is it that you claim put the coagulant in the tube? The hospital?
It's the company that makes the tubes.
Oh, so you don't put the coagulant in yourself. You don't supervise it.
That's correct.
All right. And you don't test for it.
That's correct.
All right. You're simply told that the company you get it from, that they claim that they've done it.
Yeah, I have no reason to believe otherwise.
All right. And why would you still need to freeze it then? If that preserved it, assume that they did it, and why would you still need to freeze it? I'm sorry, not freeze, but refrigerate.
Yeah, by policy, we keep all of our samples in a refrigerator just to don't give any reason to believe anything can happen to these samples.
And the refrigeration is what slows down the decomposition and the fermentation.
Well,
In addition to what you're talking about, in addition to the coagulants, that's why it's refrigerated, to make sure that fermentation doesn't occur, correct?
I don't think the fermentation will occur in the tube.
What I'm asking you is, you refrigerate it as an extra guard because refrigeration slows down. It doesn't stop it totally, but it slows down decomposition. Agree?
Yeah,
Okay. So that's an extra guard.
that's correct.
Okay. And you yourself don't know, of your own personal knowledge, whether that tube that you tested had the coagulant in it or not, or if it was refrigerated before it came to your facility, correct?
Yeah, I have no reason to believe it's been done otherwise.
And it was not sent to you in a refrigerated package.
I did not receive the sample, like the first hand.
Okay, but it wasn't mailed in some sort of refrigerated device.
Oh, yeah, exactly. But
So-
that will only decrease the blood alcohol in the long run, not increase,
Unless it's fermenting.
which doesn't occur in the tube containing preservative.
That you don't know about personally.
That I have no reason to believe, correct.
All right. And you would agree that one way to do it is, the way that some people have done it, is actually wait till it's in the tube and then inject it with, say, like sodium fluoride. That's another preservative, right?
If what's your
Sodium
question? I'm
fluoride.
sorry.
But
Yes,
another-
it is a preservative, yeah.
So that if y'all decided, well, you're actually going to make sure it's done yourself, then when the test is taken, you could just inject it and make sure the sodium fluoride or whatever coagulant you use is injected into it personally. You could do that.
I don't know. I'm sorry.
Okay. You did not receive the draw until October the 18th, which is almost a month after the date it was taken, according to your records. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And then, y'all, once it got to your place, you put it in the refrigerator, and then y'all sat on it about for another month. Fair to say?
It depends. I can't tell you the data specifically that I tested it because I don't have it here, but that's something I can look up for you.
Well, the report date says 11/14. Is that not the date that it would have happened?
The report,
The report date that I'm looking at here, is that, do you have that in
That's-
front of you?
that's the date 14, the 10/14, I'm sorry.
No, it says 11/14 for the report date.
Oh, that's correct. The day it was released.
But is that also the date you did the test?
No, no, sir.
How could you look, you can look it up from where you're at now?
Not from where I'm at. I will have to go or call someone from the lab and get that information for you.
Okay, so then that was a wrong conjecture on my part that the date of the report is the date it was tested.
That's correct.
And as you sit there today, you have no idea as to the date it was actually tested.
It will be somewhere before that 11/14.
But specific, you have no idea as to the specific date.
No, I will have to look it up for you.
I'll have just a moment, Your Honor. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I understand if you don't understand what I'm asking. I have a very intelligent client, so let me just see if these make sense to you. If you don't, that's fine. How long is the average lifespan of a, how do we say, erythrocyte, erythrocyte, a red blood cell? Do you know?
I don't know.
Would 120 days sound about right to you?
Under objection as to relevance.
Are red blood cells part of what you, I mean, they're in the tube that you tested, is that accurate to say?
That's part of the blood, yeah.
Okay. So with that foundation, Your Honor, I'd like to ask what you understand their lifespan to be, if you do.
Your Honor, would there be any foundation that the lifespan, whatever it may be, of a red blood cell, has any relevance to how she tests for the presence of alcohol? So if there's further foundation, I would withdraw my objection, but I don't think saying they exist gets us around the lack of foundation.
Do you know what hemolysis means?
No,
And if, so that process, to your knowledge, has nothing to do with your testing? Or what can occur inside a tube?
I don't know what it is, so I can talk about it.
Okay. Does glucosylated hemoglobin have anything to do with what's inside the tube, to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge.
And that's also called hemoglobin A1C. That, to your knowledge, has nothing to do with anything either?
No.
Okay.
Anything further to this witness?
Not on behalf of the state, Judge.
All right. Any reason this witness can be excused without business?
On behalf of the state would excuse her.
No objection. All right. All right, you may step down and excuse without business. Thank you.
The state has one final witness, but I would ask if this is an appropriate time to maybe take a short break.
It probably is. Why don't we go ahead and take our morning break, we'll be in recess for 15 minutes.